Good evening. Welcome to the virtual forum for the Princeton Board of Education candidates, sponsored by the League of Women Voters of the Princeton area and Princeton TV. I'm Sharon Steinhorn, your moderator for tonight. As required by the League, I am from outside of your voting area. The League is a nonpartisan organization, meaning that we never support or oppose a party or a candidate. We only work for issues. This forum is being broadcast by Princeton Community TV on Comcast Channel 30 and Verizon Fios Channel 45. It is also being live streamed on Facebook.com, Princeton Television. And no other recording other than by Princeton Community TV and StreamYard is allowed. Well, before we meet the candidates, let me explain to you, the audience, the format that we will be following. It will be in 3 parts, which we will cover in 1 hour, hopefully. 1, each candidate will have 90 seconds for an opening statement. The order of speaking is random, which we have determined right before airtime. The second part is questions, and these questions that will be asked have been generated by the members of the community who responded to the League's published request for questions, as well as by the League itself. Candidates will be asked the same questions, each having 90 seconds to respond. After all candidates have responded, each will have 30 seconds if they choose for any rebuttal, clarification, or expansion. And then the third part is that each candidate will have 90 seconds for a closing statement. And to keep us on time, our timekeeper will show the candidates when they have 15 seconds left and when to stop, at which time I will allow them to finish their sentence, and I know they will be respectful and stop. And so now I'd like to introduce the candidates in alphabetical order, and you see their names as they will appear on the ballot. And so in alphabetical order, let's say good evening to Betsy Kalber-Baglio, Mara Franceschi, Jeffrey Liao, and Brian McDonald. Thank you. And now we will hear from the first candidate to offer his opening statement, and that will be Brian McDonald. Brian?
Good evening. I'd like to express my thanks to the League of Women Voters and to Crystal Chevelle in particular for hosting this event. Before I start, I must say that my opinions are my own, and I'm speaking as an individual and not on behalf of the board or the district. If re-elected, my service will focus on our important work to move the district forward so that every child is supported and we honor and fulfill our district's mission to prepare all children to lead lives of joy and purpose as knowledgeable, creative, and compassionate citizens of a global society. Over the past 3 years, working with many talented administrators and my fellow board members, I have used my skills in finance, facilities, and planning to improve the district. With a new budget process and increased transparency, the district has saved hundreds of thousands of dollars and moved from a deficit to a surplus with declining tax increases. This winter, we expect to complete the 2018 referendum, which has resulted in important improvements to all schools. But over the next 2 years, more decisions will need to be made about our facilities to support 21st century pedagogical best practices and to address increasing enrollment. Princeton Public Schools are recognized to be among the best in the state and the country, and in many ways, our schools are the backbone of our community. More good work must be done, and I respectfully ask for your support as I seek a second term of service on our Board of Education. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Betsy Kalber-Baglio.
Hi, thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Betsy Kalber-Baglio, and I'm running for re-election to the Princeton Board of Education for a 3rd term. Please note that I make these remarks this evening as a private citizen and not as a member of the Board of Education. I do not and cannot speak for the board or the district. Public education has been an important part of my life for as long as I can remember. I'm a proud graduate of the Tantasco Regional Public School District in Sturbridge, Massachusetts. My mother and my in-laws are all retired public school teachers, and my father is a former member of the Regional School Committee in my hometown. My husband Steve and I have two sons who are both students in the Princeton Public Schools, one in the 7th grade at Princeton Middle School and one in the 11th grade at Princeton High School. I taught public school in elementary and middle schools in Connecticut and Massachusetts, and then worked in professional development for an educational collaborative of school districts outside of Boston and for a number of schools and districts as an educational consultant as well. I am the only educator currently serving on the Board of Education or seeking election to the board. I believe that my training and my perspective as an educator have been and will continue to be assets to the Board of Education as we work to ensure that all students are academically, socially, and emotionally supported now that they've recently returned to full-day in-person instruction. I also believe that the pandemic has shed light on ways in which we can improve the Princeton Public Schools. This is both an opportunity and a responsibility. And as an educator, I believe I am uniquely suited for this important work.
Thank you. And next opening statement will be from Mara Franceschi. Mara?
My name is Mara Franceschi, and I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for this opportunity. I consider few things more important than a high-quality public school education for all of our children. And this is an exciting time in our district, but we also have many challenges to navigate to ensure our continued success. Chief among those challenges is balancing aging facilities against a backdrop of increasing student enrollment and budget stressors. Successfully balancing critical necessary investments in our schools while keeping tax increases to a minimum is essential. Since moving to Princeton, I volunteered extensively in the schools, most recently on the PTO Council and most broadly on the Johnson Park PTO as treasurer for 4 years and a president for 3 years. I also served on Princeton Citizens Finance Advisory Committee as assistant treasurer for the Friends of the Library, and I continue to volunteer with many other nonprofits in town. As an active volunteer in our schools and community, I strive to give back as much as this community has given to my family. I'm a proud product of public school education, Davie County, North Carolina. I have an MBA from Columbia University School of Business, and I'm a CFA charter holder. Additionally, I have over a decade's work experience in the financial services and asset management industries, working for such firms as GE Capital and Bank of America. With my years of experience volunteering in the schools and my background in finance, I believe I bring a valuable perspective to the table, and I look forward to sharing my thoughts and ideas with you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, opening statement by Jeffrey Liao.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for organizing this and informing the community. And thank you also to Brian, Betsy, and Mara for your dedication to public service for the benefit of all of us. Most of you probably don't know me that well. I moved to Princeton just over a year ago. I'm a native of East Brunswick, New Jersey. I myself am a public education product as well. I benefited from it, I feel, and I'd like to give back to the community by helping everyone have better education right here in Princeton. I have 2 kids in school now, 7th grade and 1st grade, so I'm certainly personally invested in maintaining the high quality of public education here in Princeton, which is why I moved here to begin with. And in terms of issues, I agree that we need to maintain our facilities in an excellent working condition, as well as keep these schools open during this COVID pandemic by adopting reasonable safety measures that are science-based. And for me, that's the most important issue. Of course, because public funds are limited, we must do this in a way that is cost-effective and minimizes the tax burden on the taxpayers in the town who may or may not have their own kids in the public schools. And finally, but not lastly, I'm running to set an example for the Asian American community and hopefully increase the civic engagement and civic participation by Asian Americans here.
Okay, thank you. And I'll just remind the audience that I believe we see that there are 4 candidates and it's 3 open seats, correct? Yes. Okay. So the first question is about facilities, which has, I believe, been mentioned. And we're going to start with Mara. And here's the question. What are your thoughts about school buildings and fields? With rising enrollment, can we work with what we have? If so, how? And if not, what do you see as being needed?
I as I'm not yet on the board, I don't know that I'm as privy to all of the information that the current board members have. So I can only answer to kind of the extent that I'm knowledgeable of that. It is my concern that we are strictly limited with both our fields. That's always a concern. But the facilities, I think, frankly, are the greater concern. Our facilities are aging. They are they're constricted. We hired a consultant last year who managed to do scheduling for the middle school and was able to find space by just through better scheduling and adding classes and structuring it in a different manner. So I'm hopeful that we can continue to find space in that manner. However, I think it will be necessary to take a very close look as to where the demographics are leading us and see what we can do. And I would look for any creative answer that we can find to use the existing space that we have in a creative manner. But I believe that in a realistic world, we may have to consider that there may be need for growth. I am not privy to any of that information at this time.
Thank you. Same question to Betsy. What are your thoughts about school buildings and fields with rising enrollment? Can we work with what we have? If so, how? If not, what do you see as being needed?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. This is something we've grappled with for the past 2 terms that I've been on the Board of Education. I was just at a cross-country meet with my younger son in a place where they have huge fields, another district, and I'm always envious of the land that some of our surrounding communities enjoy. I think we've always looked to be creative with how we might develop fields. The issue is space. I know we have a number of partners within the community who would love for us to have fields, and the issue is finding that. One thing I always think about, so my campaign slogan is putting students first. We absolutely need to maintain our buildings. We also have to weigh what our buildings need with the experience of students. So before we were to think about how to reuse our buildings or if we needed new space, we would need to first do some type of demographic study, update it post-pandemic and see if the numbers still exist, as Mara had just said. But I also really care about the teaching and learning that happens in schools. So we need to weigh the needs of our district and the timing of those needs with what students and teachers, what the experience would be in schools at this time. So and again, Mara named something that I also would share, which is that the middle school has a wonderful new schedule that has really maximized what we're able to do in that building. It also puts students' needs first. So yeah, thank you.
Okay. Jeffrey Liao, do I need to repeat the question?
Yes, could you please repeat it?
Surely. What are your thoughts about school buildings and fields with rising enrollment? Can we work with what we have? If so, how? If not, what do you see as being needed?
Okay, so of course, this issue starts from taxation, essentially. So I believe that we should certainly try very hard to work with what we already have, because as everyone knows, if you build new buildings, it's more expensive for the taxpayers, and that's you have to evaluate things from a cost-benefit analysis. However, that's not to say that if it's truly necessary to expand classroom space and therefore build things on fields based on updated enrollment projections, then we should, because the long-term future of our schools, it's good for everyone in town. It's good for property values. It's good for the students. And education is an investment in every sense of the word, not just the buildings, but the students themselves. So yes, but the first choice would be to not raise taxes and work with what we have. But that's not the bottom line necessarily, depending on what an updated analysis might show. And with that, I'll say that I don't have any of the info that the current board has, as Mara pointed out. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Brian McDonald, same question.
Sure. Thanks very much for that question. It's a great question. First, with respect to fields, we definitely need more field space for many of our athletes, but that doesn't mean we need more land for fields. It means that we need to make better use of the land that we have, and there hopefully is an opportunity to renovate 1 or 2 of our existing fields and also to consider collaborating and partnering with the town, which is also looking for more space, for more fields, given both the growth of the town and the growth and interest of youth sports. With respect to our facilities, the first step is to use what we have, and the board has been very clear about that. There have been 2 excellent examples of creatively adapting and repurposing existing space. A former library at the middle school has been repurposed, and we're repurposing some space at the high school by the old gym and adding some new space. And in each case, we're creating about 100 capacity for 125 new students. The question is, will that be enough? And I think the answer is one we're going to get to in the next year or 2. If it's enough, fantastic. If it's not enough, we have an obligation to expand our facilities to be able to educate every child that we can. The last thing I would note is that we've worked very hard as a board to think of what we need to do, and we're always focused on doing it as cost effectively as possible and with the intent of the best interests of our students at heart.
Thank you. Okay, next question, and we're going to start this one with Betsy, and it's about the role of a board member. A parent tells you that although the new racial literacy classes are wonderful in intent, the execution has been clumsy to the point that for some students, the class has become a joke. As a board member, what would you do with this information?
Thank you. So as I understand the question, it's about the process of responding to the parent and not the question that the parent was asking. Is that correct?
I would assume that, but it's.
Thank you.
I didn't ask the question.
Listen, after 6 years on the board, I can't tell you how many times a parent has come with a comment like this. We all want the same thing for our children. We want a great experience for our kids. I'll answer this more generally than specifically to the high school or to the racial literacy class. The first thing that I would say is refer them to the chain of command. As a board member, I am one person. I have no power. No board members have any power unless they're at the board table with their 9 colleagues. So I would say go through the chain of command, speak first to the racial literacy teacher, reach out to them, ask your child at the high school level to speak to them. If a parent is not satisfied with that response, they would go to an administrator at the high school, the principal or the subject area personnel. If a parent is not satisfied with that response, they would sort of go up the chain of command to the assistant superintendent for curriculum and finally the superintendent. If they're not satisfied with that, there may be a time when it is referred to the board. We had developed this. I've been on the personnel committee for the past 6 years. We developed a chain of command and put it on the website. That was not something that was clearly laid out many years ago. And it's something that's really important to our parents as we work to help our own kids. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Same question to Mara. Do I need to repeat it? Okay.
No, you don't need to repeat it. I think Betsy did a phenomenal job of answering it. It's very tough to follow in those footsteps. I am laughing because I sit on the PTOC and we are trying to encourage the use of the chain of command as well. I think that is very important. I think it's important to encourage open dialogue and making sure that somebody has followed that chain and has, I think, part of the thing of racial literacy is dialogue. And I think so it's part and parcel in anything that we do as a community. In order to move forward well together, we have to openly speak. And if we have a problem, we need to address it openly and quickly with each other. So I think that my first concern would be, is there a misunderstanding in how it's being taught? And a simple conversation may very well solve that problem. And then, as Betsy said, if it doesn't, move it on up, chat with the principal, and then perhaps the principal can intervene and work out where the problem is and going up the food chain. It's important not to be too reactive, and it's important to hear both sides of the story. So I'll just stick with the open and often speaking with each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Same question to Jeffrey.
Sure. No need to repeat. I think Betsy gave a great answer, as did Mara. For me, this is kind of a due process of law issue. Of course, the 9 board members can make official decisions, but 1 board member does not. And if the problem is starting with the teacher, you talk to the teacher first. What we don't want to happen is have one parent complain to a board member, not even talk to the teacher, and suddenly the superintendent is involved, because that doesn't make sense. That's not what we're here to do per se. But yes, these issues, to the extent they're felt, should be addressed with the teacher first, and then up the detailed chain of command that Betsy described, which I don't recall. And the board should be kind of the last resort, not the first resort for these types of issues. Which is not to say that we don't care, but we have a role, and we don't want to kind of micromanage every single employee in the district, and that's not what we're here to do either.
Okay, thank you. And Brian?
Sure. What Betsy said was spot on, and I would just add that as board members, we go through a lot of training. In my 3 years, I've had 40 hours of mandated and supplemental training from the New Jersey School Boards Association. And what Betsy said is really, it's not just the best practice, it's really very close to a state requirement that we push people through the chain of command. And we try as a board all to do that. Having said that, this is a community that is very comfortable sharing their views with board members. And we each have one-on-one meetings with our superintendent every month. And that is certainly an opportunity where we can ask her if she has received similar feedback and whether there are any steps being taken to address those issues. So it is the chain of command, but we do each have an opportunity to be in touch with the superintendent if we think it's important to follow up on community issues.
Thank you. Next question. It is about the pandemic, and I'm going to start with Jeffrey Liao. And here it is. With vaccines for the youngest learners on the horizon, should schools, if given the option, mandate the vaccine for students, continue mandating masks? What more do you think can be done to ensure the health and safety of our children and staff?
Okay, let me address that question in the opposite order. So in terms of mask mandates, I think the science is pretty clear that vaccination protects the recipient from getting sick. It does not protect the recipient from kind of multiplying the virus inside of themselves and infecting other people. So in terms of protecting the community, I would be in favor of continuing the mask mandate until this pandemic is either over, or at least is over here where we are in terms of community transmission levels. The harder question about vaccines, now that there's measles, there's mumps, there's polio, there's all sorts of vaccines that are required to go to school to begin with. And I think the end point of this pandemic is when COVID-19 becomes just another one of those, that essentially it can be stopped at a systemic level by mass vaccination. Now, in terms of whether it's completely safe and effective for kids, I mean, first of all, that's an FDA determination. I understand that they're currently under emergency use authorization, which is not the same thing as full approval. But if full approval for 12 and over or 5 to 11-year-olds comes later, I think that at that time, we should have a discussion as a community about whether we want to kind of add that to the list of required vaccines, because the list is already quite long. So those are my views.
Okay, thank you. Same question, Brian McDonald.
Sure. So I'll take the vaccination part first. Vaccination's number one on the hierarchy of dealing with this pandemic: vaccination, ventilation, testing, masking, and social distancing or physical distancing. And so I'm a big advocate for vaccination, and I'm very grateful that so many of our teachers and staff and students and parents have been vaccinated. It's a very, very high percentage in this community. We're very fortunate. In terms of mandates, I'd be willing to have that conversation once full authorization is granted. But while we're working under the emergency use authorization, I'd be a little cautious about a mandate, but I would continue. I'd want to discuss it with our health professionals and my fellow board members and the superintendent, but I would be a very strong advocate for everything else that we can and should be doing. And just to say a few words about that, ventilation, we've upgraded our ventilation in all 3 buildings. I've been a strong advocate for HEPA filters for about 18 months now, and I think that I know that we're looking closely at HEPA filters for cafeterias, cafetoriums, and other shared common spaces. Testing is something we're looking at very closely, and in partnership with the state, we have opted in for testing. We are already testing our unvaccinated teachers. We're doing what we should be doing with masking and physical distancing. So I think we're doing a lot of good work.
Thank you. Same question to Mara Franceschi, please.
Okay. I will start with the masking also. I think that's a simple yes. It's proven to work. The kids they're very accustomed to it at this point. I'll back up and just say I've been thrilled with the Princeton Public School response, in the sense that my number one fear was in-school transmission. And it's my understanding that last year there was none. And I think that is incredibly remarkable, that we've been able to accomplish that. And, that was before vaccines. So I'm thrilled. I would absolutely continue masks. There's no doubt there. Vaccine mandate, I struggle with that at a local level. To me, that feels like it should be a state level decision. But that would be something that, and you obviously would need to wait until we were out of emergency use. So that's a much larger conversation with the community, whether that was the appropriate way to go. We are already very highly vaccinated, fortunately, and it shows. But even within that, you can see that we do still have cases within the community. So I would certainly proceed in a very cautious manner, and definitely wouldn't be ripping off the masks anytime in the near future. So thank you.
Thank you. And now Betsy Calber-Baglio.
Yeah, thank you. It's unbelievable how, this was never a question. We didn't even think this could be a question even 2 years ago. And now the steep learning curve that it's been for our teachers, for our students, our families, our board, and our administrators. And I'm grateful to everyone. I'm grateful to the scientists for getting these vaccines out so quickly. I agree with all three of my fellow candidates. I think I'm actually not even sure. I've tried to find the answer to this question. If a local school district is able to mandate, I'm not even sure that's true. At this point, we follow the state mandates. For example, there is a state mandate for preschool flu shots. K-12, there is no statewide mandate for flu shots. I don't know if it's something a district, even if they chose to exclude students from school for a specific vaccination, if they'd be able to. But I support CDC guidelines. I obviously am very, very grateful for the vaccine and encourage everyone to get the vaccine if they're able to. I really, truly appreciate our district's collaboration with our Princeton Board of Health. I know Jeff Berger has been in many meetings with our administrators. Our district physician has also done, he actually did a webinar for parents on the return to school. And I know that we're following closely the New Jersey Department of Health as well. I think communication is an issue we should always be thinking about, and making sure our parents have the information they need related to district related travel related quarantine. But this is really we're all in this together, and a shout out to our staff who have really done a lion's share of this work. Thanks.
Thank you to all four of you. And as a moderator, I'm never supposed to put my 2 cents in, but let me just say to the Princeton community, you are lucky. You have 4 candidates who believe in science. And I live in another community which will remain nameless. Going to the next question, and we're going to start with Brian McDonald, and it's about charter school. What is the financial impact of the charter school on the district, and are there any ways in which Princeton Public Schools can benefit from the charter school? You're on mute.
Sorry about that. There's lots we can do to benefit. One of the basic premise of the charter school model is that a charter school will pursue initiatives and strategies that should hopefully inform what the larger district that they are within and surrounding districts might do. So we should be learning from the charter school where they're doing things well. With respect to finances, the way the law is set up, it doesn't work especially well for the home district or for the charter school. And we have talked about working together in partnership to advocate for more fuller funding of of both schools, because it's one community, it's one group of public school children. It's important to highlight that charter school children are public school children. They're on all the children are on the same teams together. They're in the same choirs. They often are friends. And so to the extent that we can make both experiences outstanding and do that in a way that works financially for both, I really think that's what we should be doing. But the state law as it's set up does pose some challenges with respect to the financing for both.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if you need me to repeat the question, but Mara Franceschi, what is the financial impact of the charter school on the district, and are there any ways in which Princeton public schools can benefit from the charter school?
Again, I think Brian answered very well, and I absolutely share his opinion. I think there's a lot of things that we can benefit from through, again, this open and regular dialogue, sharing best practices, what works well. Those are the type of things we can do moving forward. It's upsetting to me that the state funding formula pits our two schools against each other. Neither school is well funded, neither system. And I would absolutely encourage us to both work together to find a structure that doesn't pit neighbor against neighbor. The kids are on teams together. A lot of them come to the high school. I'm personally friends with many charter families. And I would like to, I believe everybody should send their child to the learning environment that works best for that child. So it is a struggle that the state funding makes the relationship uncomfortable, and anything that we could do moving forward to smooth out that relationship would be welcome.
Thank you. Betsy?
Sure. In the last 6 years since I've been on the board, it's a very different environment with the charter school. I'm happy to say I think our leaders had always been in touch with one another, but our educational leaders are in touch. We now have board liaisons who reach out to people on the charter school board, and there's a communication there, a two-way communication, which is really terrific. I know we've talked before about having our content leaders work with their content leaders. As we've said, these are all our kids. I think that was said a few years ago. And many, as Mara just mentioned, many end up at the high school. So many of these families are Princeton Public School and Princeton Charter School families. And in fact, the charter school has invited all of us, the candidates, tomorrow night to a forum for their community. So they're very invested in this, in the public education. I would say, and I've said this at a charter forum in the past, I would love if the same model were in place, that we are a received district from Cranberry. They give us money to educate their students, and they have a seat at our board table. I would love, it's not required by law, but I've said before, I'd love to have one of our board members, since the money from our taxpayers goes to the charter school, to have some more of a formal connection with their board, but I appreciate the communication that has happened. I'll also say I do believe in the public schools, we need to be doing exit surveys when students leave. When people disenroll their students for the charter school or elsewhere, why are they leaving? What can we do better? And use that data to improve our own schools as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, lastly on this question, Jeffrey.
Yes, so I agree with most of the sentiments that were shared by the other three candidates. It's one town, it's one pool of kids. Some people have more than one kid, and one could be in public school, one could be in charter school. It's unfortunate that the state's funding formula essentially creates a zero-sum game between the two schools, which is obviously not ideal. I certainly support efforts to change the state funding formula, but even if that can't be changed, at least in the short term, I think we need to recognize that we're one community and not two, and create communication links or expand communication links in a sincere manner, as I think Betsy mentioned, to talk to each other, and also to maybe have like joint sports games or learn from the way each other are doing things, because ultimately when you have two systems operating in essentially the same location, maybe one is doing better than the other in one respect, the other is doing better in another respect, and it's a way to kind of in a friendly manner up the game for everyone. It's kind of like when you have the two gas stations on either corner. If there's only one, you shouldn't be paying more. So, but the fact that there are two and there's a choice, it's actually better for everyone as a whole in town. So yeah, I don't think that the charter school is an enemy of the private school, but I agree that In an ideal world, the funding formula would be changed so as not to pit us against each other. But yes, without that changing, let's maintain friendly relations and work together to improve both systems to the extent we can.
Thank you. Yes, you have a,
Well,
you have a 30-second comment.
Thank you very much. I just also thought that there's a connection between our students. There's a natural connection. They join the high school. I know my high schoolers are very grateful to have new friends from both the charter school and Cranberry and other students who move into town. So we need to think about that in ways that we can, encourage students perhaps to get to know each other even before they attend the high school.
Okay, thank you. And actually, the next question is going first to Betsy, so stay unmuted. And it's about inclusion. Excuse me. In a middle school classroom, a Black Lives Matter banner and pride flag are removed because a student is uncomfortable. At an elementary school, an alternative to Halloween parade is suggested because celebrating Halloween may make some students uncomfortable. After an outcry, the parade is reinstated. What should the process be to develop an inclusive culture?
Well, I think this is another issue all four of us would agree on. We do want an inclusive culture for all of our schools. A few years ago, we did send out climate surveys to each of our schools to find out, this was done at the district level and reviewed in the Student Achievement Committee, to find out if people were feeling welcomed and comfortable at schools. We know that a feeling of belonging in your school leads to higher student achievement and student engagement, and that's something we're all looking for. I think part of this is something our educators do a fantastic job on. That's education. We have many opportunities for students to learn from one another. And I think if you think about our mission statement of educating students for a global society, that's understanding all perspectives. And I wholeheartedly support the equity work that we've done in our schools. And I think community conversations are really important, and making sure that we all learn from each other and our community is better when we're all working together and feeling comfortable and feeling included.
Okay, the end of this question, I'll just repeat it, is what should the process be to develop an inclusive culture? And I'm going to Jeffrey Liao.
Yeah, so those were many good examples, and I'd like to thank Betsy for her excellent work on the Equity Committee and advancing inclusion for all right here in Princeton. So you mentioned a couple of things, and they seem like isolated incidents, but perhaps they're not. I think that having conversations with the community, and I mean all of the community, about these issues before things are changed, I think is very important. What we don't want is to have an individual teacher and individual principal essentially unilaterally decide that this has to be canceled or this has to be taken down, because that by definition did not involve the whole community in a discussion about these issues. So for these types of issues, which hopefully are not too controversial, I think it's good to raise those issues to a board level where the entire community can provide their opinion and maybe have some type of, a real facts-based gathering of what people feel and ultimately maybe even a survey that is a kind of community vote to decide what should be done. And now that's not to say that I believe that the board is some type of direct democracy, because it's not supposed to be, but at least kind of surveying the community as a whole and giving a forum for everyone to speak, everyone will feel included in the process, and ultimately the board can take that into account in making the best decision for all of us.
Thank you. Brian?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. I agree with pretty much everything that Betsy and Jeffrey had to say. For me, it all begins with, our attitude, which should be open and welcoming to all. We want to be as inclusive as possible. That requires that it's reflected in our education, and it's reflected in our communication. And I think some of the challenges that come up are ones of communication, where the community hasn't had a chance to really be in dialogue and discuss, the different sides of what we might describe as an issue. That I think was certainly, one of the challenges with the parade at one of our elementary schools. We would have benefited from more communication and education. And I think that it's great that we're going to take a year now to go through that process and still have the discussion as we go forward. In terms of process of creating an inclusive culture, I'm a big believer in leadership, and I'm so thrilled that we hired Dr. Carol Kelly, a nationally recognized leader in equity and anti-racism, who I have already found to be one of the great listeners I have ever met. And she is going to listen to student voices, parent voices, and community voices, and work hard to bring us together on this and other very important topics.
Thank you. Mara, same question.
Yes. I have said this a lot, but again, open, frequent dialogue. And I believe that the Halloween parade was more an issue of communication. And what was actually interesting about it is the wonderful dialogue that occurred as it was all happening. And it was a shame that that didn't happen before, so that it was a healthy dialogue, and then the community could come together and make a decision as to how to best manage it. As Brian mentioned, that is something that they're going to be doing over the next year, is involving the community into discussion and understanding of why Halloween might be uncomfortable for certain people. I think in general, my preference is always one of additive rather than subtractive. If there are certain cultures that are not being celebrated, I'd prefer to educate about those and to add celebrations in, especially after the pandemic year. I think that the children need absolutely all the celebrations and fun they can possibly have. But specifically to the Halloween parade, I think it was actually just more of a communication issue rather than anything beyond. And I believe that the process has to do with dialogue, has to do with speaking and addressing your community about how they feel. Thank you.
Thank you. And actually, this next question kind of expands on, you were talking about communication and the superintendent. The question is, one of Dr. Kelly's district level goals is to improve communication. How should the board address communication improvements? And let's start with Jeffrey.
Thank you for the question. So, of course, board meetings and various committee meetings are open to the public. I think if that's good, I think they should be kind of advertised more to proactively see community participation. For example, all the schools have mailing lists of the parents, at least. So when there is going to be a meeting, it might be a good idea to send an email, not that everyone has to attend, but at least let everyone know. This meeting is happening. We're going to discuss these agenda items in general. If you want to attend and if you want to share your opinion, we welcome it. We welcome all thoughts. In other words, it's more about procedural due process, I would say. It is, in order for the decisions the board makes to be seen as legitimate by the community has to feel that they're adequately being listened to and have an opportunity to provide input and participation in the decision-making process. And it's not that like 51% of people want to do something and the other 49% don't, therefore we vote 51%. No, it doesn't work like that. But at least we want to show everyone in the community that we care about each individual person's opinion, give them a chance to speak, including if they don't want to speak, at least send an email to the board to share their opinions. And then in the board meeting to discuss, kind of in light of what we now know about what everyone thinks, what do we want to do? So and then communicate it to the community so they feel that the process has been fair, open, and legitimate. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Same question to Mara.
I'm sorry, actually, can you repeat it?
Yeah, sure. Dr. Kelly has a district level goal to improve communication. How should the board address communication improvements?
Okay. Much of what Jeffrey said, actually, I agree with everything that Jeffrey said, and let me think what I can add to it. I believe, again, it's frequent, open communication. It's communicating out when those meetings are. What a wonderful result of the pandemic are these type of meetings. There are certainly drawbacks to this. I wish I could see the audience. But what's wonderful is that there can be somebody who's cooking dinner or driving to pick up their children from an activity and still partake in these type of dialogues. And that is something that I hope can be carried forward. And it'll be, of course, interesting to figure out what the appropriate way to do that is. But it certainly allows for more people to participate in meetings that were historically a little harder to get into. Not because it was purposely hard to get into, but just people are busy and it's difficult. So I'm optimistic that with better communication as to when they are, the Zoom links readily available, that more people can participate. And that always, these smaller forums allow for much more open dialogue and direct dialogue and help to quell some of the fears that people sometimes have that are not actually, that just need to be spoken about
Okay, thank you. Brian McDonald, same question.
Sure. So communication has been something many of us have been, concerned about and advocating, for better communication. And the fact that Dr. Kelly has a proven track record as a great communicator is another reason why she is our new superintendent. She's very clear that there are three constituencies that each require some different strategies. The first is our internal constituency, the combination, and these are different groups, but our students, and then also our teachers and our staff. We have our school parents, and then we have the rest of the community. We live in a community where only about 20% of the homes have school children in them. So it's very important to communicate to the other 80% to make sure they know what's going on. And we have to use all channels. We have to use written communication. We have to use some combination of the web and email. We need to use social media, and we need to use the press outlets. And I think that it's early days, but I'm heartened already by what I have seen. And we've got a wonderful communications officer, Elizabeth Collier, who's doing some excellent work, and she's been in her role for a few months now. And I'm both hopeful and optimistic that communication is going to feel a lot better to every constituency 6 months and a year from now.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Betsy?
Yes. Again, I agree. I'll say I agree with everyone here. Everyone's got great ideas. I'll take it in a slightly different direction, which is specifically the board to the community. And I think that's something that we've thought a lot about. We have improved communication from the board to the community. We have a Board of Education website. There's an email that you can, with one email, you can reach all of us. As Mara, I believe, mentioned, our meetings are now accessible to more people. You were able to watch them before, but you were never able to speak from home before. And that makes a huge difference to educators who have to get up early to commute to school, or parents who have a baby sleeping in the crib. That has allowed, I agree, we're missing something by not being in person, but Zoom has actually been really effective. We had started a few things pre-pandemic that were really helpful for reaching out to the community. One was Bagels with the Board. It's something I'd love to return to. That was informal gatherings. We held some at the high school, or at least one at the high school. We wanted to meet with students and staff, parents, and as Brian mentioned, so many of our community members who don't have students in the schools. As soon as it's safe to do, I'd love to go back to Bagels with the Board. We do have they used to be one pagers. We have emails that go out now after board meetings to give an update to anyone who's interested. I think we need to, the bottom line is one way doesn't work for everyone, and no communication is ever enough. So we post agendas on the website. You have to know where to find these meetings, but we need a great way to get people on our mailing lists. And again, hearing from all of our stakeholders is really important.
Okay, thank you. This is going to be the last question before we have your final closing statements. I have two good questions, but we only have time for one. Let's go to remote learning, because you were talking about Zoom and whatever. Is there a future for remote learning for our students post-pandemic? For example, a student's medical leave, snow days, or some subjects? Let's start with Brian McDonald.
Yes, there have been lots of pandemic learnings, and one of them is that remote learning has a future. I don't believe, and this is my personal opinion, that remote learning can replace, what's really wonderful about in-person learning. But certainly for snow days, sick days, it can be helpful. The district has purchased a large number of OWL cameras. OWL's a manufacturer, I believe. And those make it possible for students right now who are in quarantine to experience what's going on in the classrooms when they can't be physically in the class. So I think that, yes, there are opportunities for remote learning. I would also wonder about some of our elective courses, existing elective courses or future elective courses. Might it be possible to offer part of the driver's ed curriculum online? There are lots of good things to explore, but my answer is yes, there is a future to remote learning. It is not a substitute for in-person learning, but it can be an important supplement.
Thank you. Mara, same question.
As usual, can't say it better than Brian. I fully agree. I think that, boy, my kids are so happy to be back in school. There is no substitute for in-person learning. There's just none, and that has been laid bare and made clear. However, as with the Zoom, there's these little upsides to the fully remote that were incredibly beneficial. And there's certain populations, if a child is really struggling with social issues at school, perhaps it's a special ed child, perhaps it's a child who's who has a medical issue, or their parent has a medical issue and they can't go to school. There's a million different reasons that a remote learning option could be incredibly valuable to certain populations. I could foresee if there's maybe there's a language where you didn't have enough, maybe wanted to do it at the elementary school, but it wasn't enough students to have an individual teacher at each of the schools. Perhaps that you could then, have that be online and therefore offer more courses that you might otherwise not be able to offer. Or, perhaps there's an oversold course elective at the high school, and online allows you to have more people. I believe that there's a lot of options, if you're creative with the use and you're smart about it, I believe that it can offer very many benefits that we should be exploring. Thank you.
Thank you. Betsy?
Sure. I can tell you as a teacher, when I was a teacher, I signed up to be a teacher to be with kids, not to be on a computer screen with kids. And I know our parents and our students and our teachers feel the same way. I agree with everything Brian and Mara said. I would say a few extra things. One is that there are limits to what is allowed by our state at this time regarding remote learning. Obviously, we'd stay within that. For some of our students, remote learning did not work at all. And there's no options. Some of our special education students, some of our English language learners, for example, being in person was absolutely critical. However, we made the decision as a board to purchase one-to-one technology to provide every child an equitable platform. And that we know that children have access to internet, they have the technology. There could be after-school review sessions that are put together. There are ways to augment the in-person learning. And as Mara, I believe, just said, being creative about that. I also think there are new ways of engaging our stakeholders. This doesn't have to do with remote learning, but if a parent's at work and can't come into school for a conference, engaging them in that way is really important. So we learned that in-person connections were more important than ever. And I'm very grateful to the work of our staff and the tenacity of our students for getting through the difficult year. But I do think that remote learning should be limited to making our in-person learning even better.
Thank you. And Jeffrey Leo?
Sure. I generally agree with everything that the other three candidates have said. There is no, remote learning is not a substitute in any sense of the word for traditional in-person instruction. That should still be the default model. And we should have kind of as less screen time as possible in the classroom, because the kids are not there to look at a screen. They're there to look at the teacher in the room and see their classmates in the room. So with a strong focus on a default learning and teaching model based on traditional in-person instruction, I agree that for certain settings, for example, if there are medical issues with a particular student, or the student perhaps needs more help, whether special education or not, and that additional help can be provided to close the equity gap that Betsy mentioned for that student, yes, use the technology we already bought because it's there, it works. And it's to be creative about it, not to hopefully COVID stays under control, which is all the other questions. But assuming that it does, the idea is to have everyone in school in person as much as possible. But now you have all this fancy tech on the side. Use it to help the students that need it. And I think we can do both. So I think there is a role for remote learning to supplement what's already there. But certainly not to replace it. and to reduce any type of screens in the classroom, in-person classroom as much as possible.
Thank you. Thank you all. And it's time now for your closing remarks. And we're going to go in this order. First, Jeffrey Liao, then Brian McDonald, then Mara Franceschi, and then Betsy Calber-Baglio. So Jeffrey, your final comments.
Sure. I'd like to thank the league again and to thank the other candidates as well as the audience members who are watching for their time in educating themselves about the issues facing our community. Based on what I heard, it sounds like the community as a whole is in good hands, regardless of the outcome of the election, which is great to hear. Since my kids are in the school, of course, I have to care about that first. So this has been a good experience to hear about the issues from each of the candidates' points of view. I would say that the board is running the schools very well, but it may be the case that certain elements of our community are not fully being heard on the issues that they care about. And I don't mean this only in a way that relates to race and ethnicity, although that's part of it. It relates to a lot of things. So if I'm elected, my goal would be to be even more inclusive in our outreach to all segments of the community, including those that maybe traditionally have not been as participatory in this process. Not through neglect of the board per se, but maybe through a lack of interest or motivation or belief that their participation actually mattered. So I want to show the community as a whole that yes, we do care about what you think. Your participation does matter, and we're in this for all of us, and not only some of us, in making the schools great for all of our students. Thank you.
Thank you. Brian McDonald, closing remarks.
Sure. I'd like to also once again thank the League of Women Voters for hosting us tonight, and I'd like to thank Sharon for doing a great job as our moderator. I'd like to thank my fellow candidates, Betsy, Mara, and Jeffrey, for their thoughtful comments and for running for positions on the Board of Education. These are time-consuming volunteer roles, but ones that are extremely important. I am a passionate believer in public education. I'm a product of public school system myself from K to 12. Our three wonderful children all went through Princeton Public Schools from kindergarten through graduation and had great experiences. Our youngest just graduated in June. I'm feeling a little nostalgic already, but I believe in public schools and I believe in Princeton Public Schools and would like to continue to be of service to them. I'd also happy to run on my record, which I'm proud of, and my experience both on the Board of Education and in the community. I've chaired or co-chaired the Finance, Facilities, and Operations Committees. I've served on the Personnel and Student Achievement Committees. And in terms of service to the town, I would just note that I served on the board of McCarter Theater for 17 years, including 5 as president, and spent 6 years on the board of the Watershed Institute, another 6 years on the board of Sustainable Princeton, and I enjoyed 11 years of coaching Little League with our town's wonderful children. So I ask you to consider me and ask you to support me for a second term. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, final comments from Mara Franceschi.
First, I would also like to thank the other candidates for their time here tonight, for the League of Women Voters for the opportunity to speak to everybody, and for the audience who we cannot see, but we hope they're out there, and for your time tonight and for caring enough to take this time to listen. I am also a passionate public school proponent and have been forever. I don't think that there's anything more important to our society at large than a strong public school education for all of our children, regardless of race, religion, ethnicity, gender, level of income, or ability. I think it is the great equalizer, and I just want to fight for it in this country. I believe that public schools should be inclusive and welcoming for all, which means that every student who walks the corridors feels they're in a warm, supportive, safe environment, and that each student feels included and that they have a voice. 11 years ago, my husband and I moved to Princeton for the schools and the opportunities they would provide for our 3 children. And we have, in the ensuing years, our love for Princeton and its schools has only grown. I'm an active volunteer in the community and the schools, and I would still like to give back to this community as much as it's given to our family. I have been volunteering in the schools for each of my 11 years that we have been here. I have a background in finance, and I think that brings a valuable perspective to the table. So I look forward to the opportunity to continue to serve the community, all our children, and all of you, hopefully as a member of the Board of Education. Thank you all.
Thank you. And we'd like to get the women have the last word. So Betsy.
Well, thank you. Thank you. First off, I'd like to join my fellow candidates in thanking the League of Women Voters for providing this forum this evening and for educating our community ahead of the election on November 2nd. I'd also like to thank all of my fellow candidates for being here tonight and for really offering to take on this critical role. It's a volunteer role. And I'd like to note, I think our community is quite fortunate to have 4 individuals who are willing to give their energy and time to this job. I'd also like to thank all of you who are watching or who will watch in the next few weeks for the opportunity to share my views and priorities. I've chosen putting students first as my campaign slogan because the student-centered focus is the lens through which I've done all of my work and considered all my decisions as a Board of Education member. And I hope my focus on the needs of students has been evident this evening. I've served on 6 board committees, and I've led the student achievement and the equity committees, and that continues to be the heart of the work, my work on this board. Over the past 6 years, I've enjoyed getting to know students, staff, and families as we've all worked together to support all students, and I've enjoyed the work and getting to know my colleagues as well. I enjoy this work. I think I'm good at this work, and I'd be honored to continue to represent Princeton in making decisions in the best interests of students in our public schools. Now, a few details about the election. Ballot positions are chosen randomly, and I'm found in the 4th position, all the way to the right. However you vote, whoever you vote for in the mail, in person, starting October 23rd, or in person on Election Day, please do vote. Thank you very much for watching.
Thank you. And I thank the candidates. I thank all of you who are watching, our timekeeper, the League from Princeton area for organizing this. But before you all leave, if you can give me 2 more minutes or even less, I'll talk quickly about there are 3 ways that you can vote in the upcoming election. First, you have to be a registered voter. So please, applications must be postmarked by October 12th. That's coming right up next week. 1, you can vote by mail, by ballot, and the deadline for applying for a vote by mail is October 26th. You can use it in a drop box, and the drop boxes in Princeton will be at the Municipal Building on Witherspoon Street and the Dinky Station at the Wawa on Alexander Street. And just remember that you cannot return your vote by mail ballot at any of the early voting locations, which brings me to second way to vote. It's very new this year, in-person voting. You'll be voting on a machine. They're new. They're new in my county, maybe not in Princeton. But anyways, during a 9-day period, starting on October 23rd to October 31st, early voting will be at the Princeton Shopping Center to the left of the Bagel Nook. And the last way to vote is the usual way at your regular polling station from 6 to 8 on Election Day. And if you want any more details or didn't get them all, you just go to vote.nj.gov. All the information is there. And lastly, this forum will be rebroadcast by Princeton TV on Comcast Channel 30 and Verizon Fios Channel 45. And a recording of the forum will be available on the League's award-winning voter guide, vote411.org, and at lwvprinceton.org. And thank you very much for being an audience, and good night.